Welcome to RHI Sociable City Interviews, where we meet with global thought leaders on nightlife and the social economy. Today we are here with Armando Sanchez-Aballi, a pioneer in nighttime management, serving as the coordinator for the Athens, Georgia Hospitality Resource Panel in 1999. He later helped establish the Tallahassee panel in 2001 as part of a four-city pilot program that also included Seattle, Philadelphia, and San Diego. It was these early projects that established the framework used by RHI in more than 80 North American cities.
Hey, Armando, it's so great to have you here with me to talk. And I know what you're doing now is not much like what we're here to talk about, but you were part of really one of the first waves of this idea of how to better plan, manage, and police nightlife. And you have experience in a number of different cities. So I'm anxious to hear your perspectives. But before we begin, just give a little bit of a background of yourself and then how you got involved with RHI.
Sure. I worked in downtown Athens right out of graduate school. Actually, I left graduate school early in order to work down in downtown Athens. And from there, I picked up business development experience and people skills and district development. And from there, I went on to continue to work in that space, hooked up with RHI, worked for RHI for a spell, and then went on from there to do mostly business development work. And that's the line of work that I have today, which really allows me to pull from a lot of what I learned working for RHI very early in my career.
Now, Athens is a major college town, college university town. And there were some issues that were going on there, which is why you came into contact with RHI. Now, Art Jackson, who you worked with, came to an event that we did in San Diego. And then he came back and wanted to try to develop this idea of a hospitality resource panel. So you had just come out of writing poetry as part of your graduate degree, and then all of a sudden we're in business development, working with the downtown group. So what was your first impression when Art kind of described this approach to you?
It was daunting because he described some of the issues that were taking place, and in a very indirect way, he said, "We are hiring you to solve those issues." So it was quite an experience. And for background, downtown Athens is a Main Street program, a successful one. The retail shops downtown had survived the opening of the mall a decade or two earlier, and they had sustained downtown, and they were the anchor of the local downtown economy. Downtown Athens was so successful that other businesses began to open up, including dining businesses and the music clubs, because downtown Athens is the home of the B52s, REM, Widespread Panic. So it had a very thriving nighttime and economy as well. And what I noticed early on is that we were talking about two different economies, and the infrastructure and the services delivered during the day were designed around office retail space. These were banks, attorney offices, gift shops, etc. And so all of these services, solid waste policing, were designed to support those businesses. Yet, after hours at night, you had an incredibly booming nighttime economy, which in many respects, because of the revenues that were generated through taxes, etc., was subsidizing a lot of those services. But the policies made lawbreakers out of these nighttime businesses. For example, solid waste policies. The way it was set up, the pickup times were around 5 p.m., which meant that someone who had closed their music club at 3 or 4 a.m. needed to put their solid waste somewhere, and they would put them on the curb. But that was against the code. You couldn't set out your solid waste more than 2 hours in advance of the pickup times. So it would make, it would generate code violations. But the other point is, as more restaurants opened up and downtown Athens became a destination for some really fine chefs who had moved over from Atlanta, which is a booming city, and the policy was to put out your garbage for a 5 p.m. pickup. So diners were having to dodge garbage bags on the sidewalk at around dinner time, which wasn't a problem when you only had 1 or 2 restaurants, but now we're talking 10, 15. And so there was just a big disconnect between what was happening after hours and what was happening during the day. And essentially Art Jackson said, spend some time out there and just come back, put your observations down. And that was one of the observations that I made early on, was the disconnect, but also in the lack of communication between 2 entirely different populations operating at very different hours and not having an opportunity to cross paths, because when the nighttime economy began to open up for business, the office retail individuals had already gone home. So the idea of bringing in these multiple perspectives to take a look at things, the policies, for example, factoring in what was happening after hours, we began to see an open-mindedness and a willingness to reconsider what initially was policy that was not going to be changed under any circumstances, because the thinking was, this is a law enforcement issue. We'll just use law enforcement to solve it.
I know you have a funny story too about the trucks themselves, because as the summer came around and you had the organic waste in the plastic bags, which were a requirement for pickup, you made an observation too, because a lot of people were complaining about the odor that was coming from downtown. But you made an observation just with the trucks.
At least 2 things. One was when the trucks were older, and the trucks again were more accustomed when they were providing service downtown, were picking up mostly paper products. But as I mentioned, there was a boom in the dining industry, so the mix of solid waste products had changed. Well, these garbage trucks, some of them were older, and they would actually leak because there were no plugs, or someone had taken off the plug that holds the waste and that holds any liquid within the truck. They were either missing or defective. And so as these trucks winded their way through this beautiful downtown Main Street, they would be pouring out liquid waste that had been fermenting inside the bags. Yet the reaction was, downtown stinks. It's the club owners, it's the late night dining businesses that are causing this problem, when in fact that wasn't it. The second big solid waste issue that we noticed is some of these nighttime economy business owners were actually very eco-friendly and painstakingly would wash out their glass bottles in order for them to be recycled. However, in some cases, during some of these routes that the solid waste team would conduct, they would just throw in all the recyclables with the garbage and not recycle at all, which was a point of contention, and it was documented. But as I suppose I was a nighttime mayor at the time, what would be called the nighttime mayor, you had to proceed very tactfully and know how to present information that contradicted some of the perceptions in order to make progress. So one principle of the Hospitality Resource Panel, and this is back in the mid to late 90s, was this idea of being respectful and not putting anyone on the spot if there was another way to expose some of the shortcomings in the downtown system.
Yeah, now you mentioned the Hospitality Resource Panel. That was a model that we had developed back in that period of time. Can you describe what it was and how you feel it functioned?
Well, it was based on relationships. There was a huge lack of trust in the downtown district, again, between these different economies and these different businesses and the municipal services that supported these businesses. Well, how better than to bridge the misperceptions and the lack of trust than to bring all of these individuals together in a facilitated conversation. And over time, and when I say time, I mean just a matter of months, even within the first year of having a hospitality resource panel, individuals who normally saw themselves as adversaries began to see themselves as allies. They each had a different role in the life of downtown Athens, which everybody agreed we wanted to continue. And they began to be more open-minded about their different perspectives and began to develop relationships outside of the hospitality resource panel in their day-to-day comings and goings. And that was a huge win.
So you saw that it was a catalyst for other problem solving that didn't come under the auspices of the resource panel.
That's exactly right. So it was always interesting to see the chief of police at a table with a club owner with, different colored hair, dressing very differently than the police chief, sitting across from each other, and then observing that these individuals were having conversations outside of the hospitality resource panel, and that these nighttime business owners began to see the police department and other municipal services as allies, as resources that they could turn to. That was
you also helped to facilitate a working group of the venue operators, and we organized some management level trainings for them. How do you feel that process was? What was it like before, and what do you think the outcome was by getting the business owners to come together and to begin to focus in on practices that they can all put into place?
One complaint we used to hear is that these business owners were not professional, they were not involved in the life of downtown, that they were just opportunists. Well, we forget these are small business owners, independent business owners. So we couldn't complain why they were independent, because we had independent business owners from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. as well, small shop owners as well, who wanted to be independent and have their own business. So there was this perception that they were not very professional and not interested. So by having you, Jim Peters, come in and put together these training sessions, particularly one of the club owners, when we had them fill out a survey, said, "We appreciate being treated like professionals," which again was a big moment for us because word got out that these training sessions that we would organize were valuable, were helpful, and would expose some of the resources that were available to the club owners. In that kind of environment, again, these are fiercely independent small business owners. When we think about a club owner, we may not think of them as a small business owner worried about staff, the ice machine, but they have a lot of demands and challenges on their time. To bring them in that kind of an environment, it was unbelievable how open-minded they were. Even though they considered themselves experts at running a nighttime business, they actually, in that kind of trusting atmosphere, were open to changing practices that perhaps were not very either effective or were actually harmful to the environment. And then watching their competitors in the same room at a training session provide best practices.
It was a peer-to-peer influence.
The peer-to-peer influence was another huge win. And we saw that in action, and we're very, very happy that happened.
Now, from Athens, you moved on to Tallahassee, which was more of a state capital, so from a college town to a state capital. And then we did have some work in Ybor City, which was an entertainment district that was quite well known in Florida, in the Tampa area, as part of the city of Tampa. So as we talk about for the last few minutes here, how do you see each of those experiences give you an insight as to what foundational structure is necessary, regardless of the type of city or the audience that's being served? What is a common foundation that you see was necessary in each of the three cities.
Huge contrast between a small college downtown and big time state capital in Florida, where you have very significant alcohol and beverage industry representation. So the scale was entirely different. In Athens, you had small business owners, office retail, nighttime economy. In Tallahassee, you had very, very powerful political associations who got involved. What didn't change was the Hospitality Resource Panel model and guiding principles that also was effective in a state capital as well. In addition, another contrast was, despite having these very powerful, sometimes groups opposed to each other because they were competitors, whether it's the Restaurant Association having policy differences with the Beer Distributors Association, they could get things done. So in instances where in a small college town, the pace may have been slower and there were barriers, having powerful interests at the table who had bought into the Hospitality Resource Panel, they could actually remove the barriers very quickly. And we did see that in Tallahassee. Ybor City, I would describe Ybor City as being in full combat mode when we began to visit, such that when there was that transition from daytime to nighttime economy, the police department would deploy SWAT teams. And SWAT teams were on the different corners of the main strip in Ybor City, which suggested that, one, we see this as a law enforcement issue, and two, we might need to use maximum force in order to solve some of these problems, which was not the approach we have taken in other cities. So we began to hold meetings with the key stakeholders, just as we did in other cities, and again began to have some success. But I will point out, when you think about planning for the future of a district that aspires to be 24/7 or have a vibrant nightlife, in these three cities that I worked, a lot of the work we did was mitigation. We weren't there to help plan the evolution of a vibrant, sociable city. So if I could say anything to anyone out there, or any district that aspires to attract individuals into their central business district after hours, it would be to start early. And also because what we noticed is, if the stakeholders don't see that there's a need or don't feel there's a crisis, they may not feel motivated to even get involved. And that would be a key role of a nighttime mayor, is to be able to rally these stakeholders in a time when there aren't any issues, but the district may still be in the planning phases. So hire a nighttime mayor early in the process, have that person be part of the planning process, and not just brought in when mitigation is needed in order to avoid a catastrophe.
Okay, well, that's wise words, and clearly you speak from experience. Well, this has been enlightening and informative. You brought back some memories. Do you have anything else that you could speak to in terms of, even since you've been involved with RHI, we've now evolved the organization. You've seen some of what we do today. How have you seen the organization evolve, and what role do you see it plays now?
Well, you may have mentioned it early. RHI has evolved from working in the responsible beverage service space to being integral into the life of a community. What drives a lot of RHI, as I mentioned before, is not just being able to draw from experience and understanding what the impact of policy might be. It's RHI being able to develop a community of individuals and be able to identify who's needed to develop that community. Because there's no one entity that can solve some of the issues or plan out an dining entertainment district all by themselves. So RHI provides an incredible platform for individuals who really do care about the life of the district to come together and form the relationship. So I would say if there's anything that's lasting, once we're no longer talking about policy or incidents, it's the relationships that individuals have formed with RHI as the forum.
Okay. Well, this has been great, Armando. It's great to see you again, and glad to hear that your family's doing well and that you're enjoying your life in Tampa.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Having fun.